Hi, I'm Catherine.
And I'm Gail. Welcome to another episode of Women Over 70 Aging Reimagined, in which Catherine and Gail get real. Today, Women's History Month is on our minds. How is it that women are limited to 1 month a year? We even had to fight to be recognized for 1 day a year and then finally 1 week a year. Is this progress? No, Catherine, it's not progress. It's not. When our Constitution was formed, equal rights were part of the very frame. And yet, every person who was not a white male has had to fight for protection every year since. What the Constitution Meant to Me is a play from 2017 by Heidi Schreck. It takes place in Washington. Schreck stars in the leading role, bringing her personal voice to the issues. It covers abortion, women's rights, domestic abuse, the history of the United States. It was a finalist for the 2019 Pulitzer Prize play for drama. Heidi Schreck covers all of these issues with such verve and she just makes it so exciting. And the play has now reappeared on the stage on movies. You can find it in the movies on Netflix, and so it's become something that people are really talking about, especially now during Women's History Month.
Well, thank you for that because I hate to admit that I am not familiar with the play.
Yeah, you should
her
watch
work,
it.
so I will become
You might want
familiar by the end of the day. So, thank you. That's really powerful, and those issues that you noted that those are the issues that have been with us with women for since the beginning of time, apparently. But I think you and I both took some time to review episodes of our weekly podcasts, and we have a category called social activism. So I spent a lot of time listening to episodes from these women. We have a dozen and 2 dozen women in easily in that category, and these are the women I think of them as stepping into history in the late 1960s, early 70s, and they've been making change ever since. They do not stop. They don't take a breath, really. And I was thinking that they're in so many different arenas, but what they seem to have in common is they all really got started in this with the second wave of the women's movement. And I think the early issues, the focus had to do with domestic violence, rape, reproductive rights, and we have Heather Booth, who started a guy who lived in Chicago for many, many years, and then now for the last 30 maybe has been in Washington, D.C. That Heather Booth is a person who's been involved in every major social issue that you can imagine in a very deep, meaningful way. A strong leader. She was founded the J.A.N.E, which was the underground network to help women get abortions when abortions were still illegal. She was joined by Patty Novick and Susan Oppenheimer, other guests. So that's just an example of making major change in a positive way. But I'm curious, Gail, when did you become would you say that you became involved in being active and activist?
It's a good question, Catherine. I'm going to ask you the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So I grew up in a very liberal family, and causes were always, they were always right there in front of my nose. Many causes had to do with poverty, with rent control, with the issues right around I was born right around 2 days before Pearl Harbor. And so my parents were really into those kinds of issues. They were lucky to find an apartment in my uncle's building. He owned a building, and he found an apartment. They found an apartment there, and that's where they stayed. And so issues of all kinds were always in front of my nose. I got married very young and had children very young. And so the most that I was able to really accomplish during those years was to write postcards, was to take an occasional, participate in an occasional demonstration or walk. And it really wasn't until the 80s that I became so much more aware of what was happening out in the world. I myself experienced a form of domestic violence in my first husband. And so I was busy taking care of those kids and managing myself. Yeah.
I hadn't put that together, that you were born just 2 days before Pearl Harbor.
You have to have respect for me.
I do.
What about you, Catherine?
Well, my upbringing was very different. I grew up in a farm family in west central Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only causes I was aware of, or the only cause, was farmers' rights, not cause focused at all, really. So for me, it was when I went to the University of Minnesota as an undergraduate, and I started working in a place called the Help Center, Higher Education for Low-Income People, which was a clearinghouse, or a center for people getting out of prison, older women with children, single parents, all of the students of color, where it was a place where everybody could come to get kind of one-stop shopping, academic tutoring, financial counseling, personal counseling, all of those services that were scattered all around the university and very difficult to find. So that was my real introduction to civil rights, for sure. And I mentioned to you a little bit ago that the Black Panthers, Minneapolis Black Panthers, used to meet in my living room, my apartment. What did I know about? I didn't know much, right? But I wanted to be supportive, and these were people I met through the Help Center. I participated then in demonstrations, civil rights, anti-war demonstrations, guerrilla theater for women's rights. And yet I felt that I knew even then that it was superficial. I didn't really get it until I just had more exposure. And when I graduated and I started teaching, this was in the early 80s, when I came to DePaul and I started teaching women's issues. And had to study, I had to learn more, study about the histories and the issues. And then the women that were in my courses were in their 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s. Many had stories similar to yours, in that they didn't you went to college, but they didn't go to college sort of on time, or they started and had to stop, and they were busy raising their children and just working. And so some of the women's movement sort of passed them by, although they were very much engaged in all of the issues that you mentioned. So,
right, yeah. The thing that I think about now is how too many women didn't, myself included, we did not realize that we needed to fight for ourselves and these issues that were all around us.
Right.
And when we awoke, at least when I awoke, I was stunned by all that I had missed in the 60s and 70s. And that women are, today, thank goodness we have Women's History Month. Thank goodness we have guests like we have. Our guests are so inspiring. They make you think. Every one of them makes you think and reconsider how you are active in the role that you can play.
Right.
To help.
Right. So I think of, Patty Novick, who as a teenager worked with Martin Luther King Jr. And marched with him and was mentored by him, and how she has continued her service over all these years. She's done a lot to, when she was she was one of the founders of the women's kind of movement here in the Chicago area, and was very attentive to wanting to bridge gaps between class and race. And I think she, in her episode, she talks about feeling that they really did accomplish a lot in that regard. And she continues, the whole Black Lives Matter movement now. She's active in that and continues to be very thoughtful about what's been gained, what's been lost, kind of where do all those issues stand. And she's in good company with so many of our guests.
For sure. Doesn't she have a Seeds of Faith and Justice? Is that hers?
That's her quote.
That's her quote, right.
Yes. She apparently she talks about being out in the garden and being so frustrated and just not knowing how to make things happen as quickly as she wanted. And Martin Luther King Jr. came out to the garden and said something about plant the seeds, they will bloom again.
Yeah.
Things will bloom again.
Right. Faith and justice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
housing was a tremendous issue in the 40s and 50s. Huge issue. And fair housing has continued to be an issue right along. There was an attorney, his name was Gertz. I think it was Elmer Gertz. And he was the father of a friend of mine as I was growing up. And he was one of the first males that I knew who actively worked for the underdog, who worked for housing rights and other issues for people who had no voice for themselves. And isn't that what we do for our listeners? Is we bring the voices of our women, so that they can be inspired and think about things from a different point of view.
Well, yeah, we do. I think of it as our current form of activism, providing platforms, forums for women who have all this wisdom and experience, insight. I think you used the term, they continue to be vigilant about these issues, to bring these to light, because we all, even though we might be involved in these issues, we still have a lot to learn from one another and our younger generations who don't have that sense of history, and can take many things for granted.
Right.
And so they really are standing on the shoulders of our wise women, our brave women. I think about Sunny Fisher. You mentioned housing, so Sunny in her episode talks about having grown up in public housing in the New York,
right,
and fair housing continues to be one of the major things she works on. She's a philanthropist. She's been director of major foundations, and continues to serve on boards. And she's she's championing housing again for low-income people, including homes that are in areas that what are they called? That they're older homes. They need to be preserved because there's so much history with them. But there's this drive-by.
Preservation.
Yeah, thank you. That was a tough one.
Right.
She talks about drive-by raising of these homes. They just bulldoze them down because they're in poor neighborhoods. And so she's doing a lot to preserve the homes and the history and the culture around that.
You know, a good portion of my husband's life was spent in affordable housing. And he was a developer and he was a mortgage banker. And he spent many, many years working for Community Investment Corporation, which was an organization that invested in affordable housing. So the stories that he would tell about, people going to the courts, trying to eliminate affordable housing, trying to take advantage of the rents that they could charge, were all very real at that time. And so that was in the 90s and early 2000s. Yeah. And so affordable housing it's a very, very big issue.
Yes,
and Sunny Fisher, absolutely, she inspires us for the way that she thinks about this.
Yes. Yeah. I learned more about housing through her than I had ever known. And another area I learned more about was transportation.
Yes.
The importance of transportation from Jackie Grimshaw.
Right.
And the way she talked about transportation as being so essential, I only think about it in terms of I get in my car or I get on the L when I used to go down to work, get on an airplane. She said, transportation for in neighborhoods that don't have good access to transportation, then it affects their employment, where their housing, their education, their access to good health services, to good food. I had never thought about it in that way. About how essential it is.
Poor transportation absolutely promotes poverty.
Yeah.
And especially in our city where the lines are drawn.
Right.
Transportation is so crucial.
Yeah.
So I never thought of that as an activism issue before. We listened to her.
Yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jackie Grimshaw, right.
So I think another area that certainly was exposed to when I was in college and those early years of being involved in demonstrations and all was about that art is political. Art can be political. But then we met Gerda Bernstein, Gerda Meyer Bernstein. So do you happen to have her catalog?
I do. Here it is. And I was looking for a picture one of her artworks that I would show up. I think this might. This is an installation about global issues. What's it called? Global chaos. And those small artifacts that you see all the way around the installation and in the center, those are toilets.
That's what I thought.
Open toilets, yes. And so global chaos. She is wonderful, isn't she? She just does all of these walk-in installations that you walk through, and all on bearing witness to issues that have occurred throughout the world that are notorious for their indignation.
Man's inhumanity to man.
Exactly.
Which includes, she has installations dealing with domestic violence and the Holocaust and what you just showed us. And she's 98 years old and she's still creating her art.
Yes, she's amazing. She's just amazing. And another issue we talk about, as women age, do they lose their interest in what it was that they were active about all those years? She's in a wheelchair. She's obviously up there in years, and she is still creating installations in her head.
Right.
And telling someone else how to install them instead of installing them herself.
Right. Right.
I think that's the beautiful part of listening to these voices, is that we understand that as women age, they don't lose anything. They may lose some physicality that they had, but they don't lose the ability to continue to be who they are.
Right.
Some people do, of course.
Right. But yeah. That just reminded me of Susan Monica Oppenheimer, who in her 70s took up tap dancing, as have some of our other guests in their later years taken up tap dancing.
Right.
At her 80th birthday party, which I was happy to attend, she gave us a tap dancing demonstration. And so I think she's a little less active, but she now supports young people, especially young people from poor neighborhoods, to bring them into the world of tap dancing. And she is a philanthropist in that way. She also supports the jazz. She and her husband Ted are great supporters of jazz. And so taking those areas that she, especially tap, that she once was very active, and now bringing that to the younger generation is very cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Bobby Wilson is another who supports jazz.
Right.
Yeah.
So what about Bobby? People might not know her.
She is one of our guests, and she's a beautiful singer, and she promotes jazz for younger people, and she brings concerts all over so that people who cannot get out are able to listen. And she's a beautiful woman.
Is she doing this on Zoom now? Is she doing it virtually?
They are doing some on Zoom. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And she promotes other vocalists and other artists so that they all can have a voice.
Have a voice.
It's all about having a voice.
Have a voice. Have a political voice. Rebecca Sive is one of our guests who has written books, studies, teaches, writes, advises folks in Washington about voting rights and getting people out to vote. I can only imagine what she's doing right this moment with all of this discussion about trying to, the other party trying to curtail access to voting. And she's also a great champion of younger women getting into holding political office.
Oh, yes. And what about Heather Booth? Isn't she in that arena?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, she is.
When I was trying to contact Heather about something pre-presidential election, and I got her email bounce back with the message, I am involved 24 hours a day in the political scene, so I will not be getting back to you until after the election.
Yes.
Okay.
Priorities. What's most important?
Heather talks in her episode about the importance of demonstrating and all the things that women have done over the decades, right, and voting and holding office and getting on boards.
Yes.
On policy-making boards. She, of course, is on many boards. And Sonny Fisher talks about this also. She's president of the board of the Housing Preservation Board. And Hetty Ratner, I'd like you to talk about Hetty Ratner because you actually know her and her work.
She's an amazing woman who founded the Women's Business Development Center, and so has supported women entrepreneurs for her entire career.
40 years.
At least. And she has the Women's Business Development Center. She has not just that one, but she and her partner, Carol, they created, I think, 4 different areas in Illinois and Wisconsin, possibly Indiana, where there are women business development centers. And so she helps women get their share of the quota for supplier diversity funds. Mm-hmm. And that's a big deal. Women were getting 0.5%.
Yeah.
And today I think it's still nothing. It's still 2 to 4% is what it is, based compared to what men get.
Uh-huh.
And proving that you are a woman business owner requires certification. It requires funds that you have to put out in order to be certified. Mm. And Hetty has promoted this for all these years. Men do not have to certify that they are a male-owned business. Women have to certify that they are a woman-owned business, because there is still this point of view that, the woman's name is on the license, but a man must be behind her.
Must be really running the show. Yeah.
And women own more than 50% of the small businesses in the United States today. And they still have to prove that they are the owners.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Certification is a big issue. Women Business Enterprise. And Hetty is so active still in that arena, though she has turned over the reins of the organization now.
She describes herself as semi-retired.
Yes, she's barely retired.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking also about Audrey Peoples and Ronnie Hartfield, who are actually sisters, and they both serve on boards, major boards. Ronnie is she's also one who has brought art and religion into the public, improving access. And she serves on for the Art Institute, a major board for the Art Institute, and Audrey serves on other boards. And I love her episode because she just talks so straight about bringing issues of racism and sexism to the conversation, and how to do that in ways that can be listened, heard. And she's had some major influence on changing the complexion of the boards that she sits on. And she talks about how one of the male board members said, well, what difference does it make that the board needs to have diversity? Why would that be important? Because we're all well-intended. We're all, we want to give money. We want to support. She said, because she was like, I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was because you don't have that lived experience. You don't have a good sense of what it is that people really need. And you frame things from your own limited perspective. And he was like, oh, well, maybe that's the case. So we'll let you stay on.
They are very recent guests, both Audrey and Ronnie, the sisters. Yes.
Yeah, I think they're 98 and 99 or something.
They are up there, that's for sure.
Right.
Well, it's our time just goes so fast, Catherine, when we are getting real.
Well, we are excited. I mean, we really are excited about
women's
issues for sure, and about the women who agree to be guests and share their stories with us, and allow us to be able to disseminate the word, and I was thinking about, our guests and everybody else who's been recognized this month for Women's History Month, as we should be recognizing every day of the year, have such staying power.
That's right.
And so they have seen the advances and the declines, and then another advance and another decline. It's not just one win after another. So, and yet, when we ask them, why are you still doing this? Because there's so much more to be done.
That's right. Sometimes it feels like we haven't moved at all, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Alas, yes. Sometimes it does.
But we have, slowly, and as the Constitution, they play what the Constitution meant to me says. We are still fighting for all the issues that we were fighting for before. And I don't know about you, but it just gives me such a thrill to bring these women's voices out into the world and to help them be seen and heard. All women need to be seen and heard. And these, especially those in our social activism category, are making that happen. They're living that. And it's very inspiring. We are fortunate that you and I are fortunate that we have been asked to speak now for many organizations and to bring these voices to life. And that's an exciting opportunity for women over 70.
Yeah, it really is. And it's organizations that are focused on women, certainly, but more recently, we're also now speaking with organizations that have men and women members. So that's really exciting too, to bring the voices of women to further enlighten the male population.
Yes. And of course, always to younger listeners who can learn from these voices that we present.
Right.
Yeah. So
thank you. And you know what? I said I didn't know about the play. Of course I know about the play, what the Constitution meant to me. I haven't. It just didn't.
I'm sure you do. Of course you do.
Of course I do. But it just didn't click for me in that way. So I just don't want to end the show being, my ignorance totally exposed.
And on that note, we'll see you next week for Women Over 70 Aging Reimagined.